Okay, so since this has been recorded as well, I think we'll kind of get going so that we don't kind of run over time. But what I've done today is I've left plenty of time at the end for question and answers, because what this session is going to be is really a very kind of brief overview of the importance of nutrition for sport and exercise. So there is a little bit more, I guess, on of a focus on people who are particularly interested in sport and are regular exercisers, in terms of, you know, the actual importance of nutrition, not necessarily going into the deep kind of specifics of what exactly you should be eating. I'll give a kind of brief overview of all of the different topics that we're going to cover throughout the presentation, so you get an idea of the kind of things that we're going to cover. But before we do that, I just wanted to, I will kind of obviously introduce myself in a moment so that you know who I am, but just so that you know, obviously, all of the different things that we're going to be thinking about as we go along, to give you an idea of what might be important for you to think about. We have got lots of things to do with, obviously, nutrition to support any training and recovery that you do. So that doesn't matter whether you are a seasoned athlete or whether you are someone who's just a regular exerciser. Maybe you just are thinking about doing something specific. So maybe you've got an event that you're going to be trying to do. Maybe it's something more serious, or it could be something for fun this year, maybe a 5K or something along those lines. So all of these things that we're going to talk about today are going to be relevant, but it's just thinking about picking out the bits that are going to be most important for you. So we'll be thinking obviously specifically about what it means by sports and exercise nutrition, and then why is obviously a good diet an important foundation for exercise in general. So again, for those people who aren't particularly sporty but are interested in finding out more about nutrition and how it relates to exercise, that will be a good area for you to have a little think about. We're also going to look at energy levels, not only as an athlete but in general, and how doing exercise obviously does change your energy requirements ever so slightly. Again, it really depends on how much you exercise, whether you're a serious exerciser or athlete, or whether you're just a kind of bit more of a recreational exerciser. So again, it's just picking out some of the points which are going to be particularly important for you. We're going to talk obviously about general healthy eating and achieving a balanced diet, which is obviously important to everybody, but specifically thinking about how that relates to exercise as well, and why that's important. And then for those of you who perhaps are more serious exercisers, or you, as I say, you've got a goal in mind for this year, lots of people kind of put goals in place for January. We'll be thinking about how nutrition does actually affect performance, and what difference it might make to someone who is more of a serious exerciser, or just someone who wants to feel better when they have got small exercise goals to achieve. And then lastly, we're going to have a little think about food quality. You know, what kind of things are important to consider when you're putting things in your supermarket trolley, and you know, what you're picking in terms of the packaging, how marketing might have an impact on what you choose, but perhaps what to think about in terms of what's important to consider when you're looking at what is described as something that's healthy or not healthy, or has lots of fibre in it, that kind of thing. There'll be all sorts of things which are kind of can be quite confusing when it comes to the types of food that you think you should be choosing. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then, as I said, what I actually want to do is I want to leave quite a bit of time at the end of the session to be able to have questions from you, because I know that there will be, I know I won't necessarily be able to cover really specifics in terms of if you've got a particular training plan or goal in place for yourself, and you're always welcome to contact me afterwards. I'll put my contact details on the last slide. But you might have some general questions about healthy eating as well, aside of exercise and sports nutrition, because obviously, as I say, this is much more of a focus on kind of people who are more regular exercisers and athletes. But if you've got some general health food questions at the end, feel free to note them down as we go along, and then I can answer those at the end. I'm very happy to do that. And also, just to say that I will be covering quite a few other topics in my other two sessions that I'm going to be doing next week. So I'll remind you of those at the end, but there's going to be one on Monday at 8 p.m. And that's going to be all to do with energy levels and improving those through nutrition and other lifestyle choices. And then on Wednesday the 17th at 12 p.m. next week, I'm going to be covering something which a lot of people probably be interested in if you're trying to get organised with nutrition, which is going to be meal planning, budgeting and batch cooking. Okay, so I'll be covering that next Wednesday at 12 o'clock. Okay, so just a little bit about me, because I haven't properly introduced myself yet. So my name is Caroline Collard, and I run a local business in Histon and Impington called PRO.FORMANCE. I am a registered nutritionist, and I mainly I do a lot of sports nutrition things, but obviously work a lot with people when it comes to weight loss, healthy eating in general. And I also, my qualification is clinical, so I do a lot of work with people with chronic disease, all the common ones, type 2 diabetes, high cholesterol, heart disease, all of those kind of things I cover. And I cover those obviously with exercise as well, because I'm a qualified personal trainer. And within my remit of that, I also do a lot of particularly kind of strength and conditioning work, and I work alongside a physio, and we do a lot of injury rehabilitation together. I'm also a qualified sports massage therapist, doing a little bit of relaxation as well upon request, but obviously all of that is really to do with my rehabilitation side of things and recovery things that I do with people. I do a lot of one-to-one consultations and some small group work, and obviously like today I do a lot of presentations, workshops, courses and webinars, and some I do face-to-face. I do lots of work for the lovely Cambridge City Council and the Healthy You team, and I also work with alongside businesses as well, where they try and do things like lunch and learns for your business. So if that's something you might be interested in, obviously the contact details are there for PRO.FORMANCE, but I'll put them on the last slide as well in case you want to get in contact. Okay, so that's enough about me. Let's move on to just a little something I want to mention before we kind of get into the details of nutrition for sport and exercise. And that is, if you do obviously decide to go for some support from somebody in terms of nutrition, you want a bit more help, particularly after maybe listening to some of these sessions, I do encourage you to really make sure that you do always work with a registered professional. There are lots of people out there who may call themselves a nutritionist, but nutritionists in general are qualified obviously to provide information about food and healthy eating, and many obviously employers employ nutritionists in all sectors, but they would only consider recruiting a registered nutritionist. So anyone can actually call themselves a nutritionist. However, only registrants on the UK Voluntary Register of Nutritionists can actually call themselves registered. So I do urge you to work with someone who is registered if you do go ahead and do something like that. And we as nutritionists can also do things like recommending NHS approved supplements such as folic acid, for example. You shouldn't be recommended any kind of supplements from someone who isn't registered. So that's a little just something just to make sure that you are kind of keeping yourself safe and looking for the right kind of support, hopefully, if you do go ahead with that kind of thing. So nutrition to support training and recovery. Now, a lot of the time you will see on lots of these slides, I will be referring to maybe athletes, sports people, but I really do want you to think about, if you're just a regular exerciser or a general gym goer, or just, you like to stay active, lots of these tips can also apply to you. So really kind of, think about how what I'm kind of talking about might be relevant to you, and do, as I say, note down any questions where you're not sure whether something I've mentioned applies to your general gym goer or exerciser compared to perhaps a more high level athlete or sports person, because a lot of the time the information is going to be very similar. So first of all, I just want to talk a little bit about these different things. This is one of the infographic sheets which I share regularly with my clients, whether it's one-to-one or, as I say, when I do presentations and things, which is thinking about several things, which we can kind of use this infographic to think about. And that is, firstly, when you're thinking about food in general, when we're talking about healthy lifestyles, about fueling ourselves correctly with the right kinds of food, what I would love most people to always consider and think about is how many of your foods that you can see looking at that sheet there are from those different categories. Okay, so in the top part we have what we call whole foods. Whole foods are foods which generally have not been changed from their original state. So you can see lots of things like fruit and vegetables, whole grains and legumes. Obviously you've got meat and eggs and fish, nuts as well, and seeds, foods which really technically don't need a package. Okay, so if you were to look at that food in the supermarket and it wasn't in any sort of packaging, you'd still be able to say that's what that is, and I know it doesn't really contain any other ingredients. Okay, so I want you to think about those whole foods first of all, how many you think you might regularly be putting on your plate or having across your week. And then I want you to think about minimally processed foods, so that middle category there and what that might entail. So minimally processed foods generally are foods which have been changed from their original state. So they might have started off obviously in the whole food category there at the top, but they've been adjusted, changed, processed in some way. Now, within that minimally processed category, you can, of course, almost have a ladder of processing because, for example, let's have a look at nuts from the whole foods in the top section, going down into that minimally processed category where you can see the jars of nut butters. Okay, so nuts have been changed into nut butters. Now, there's a real range out there, and this is telling you a little bit about the difference in terms of how much food can be processed, even within a minimally processed category, never mind getting into a highly processed category. And that would be looking at those nut butters. Obviously, nuts could be blended up until they become the nut butter, and you've not added anything else. You've literally just put it through a process, okay, by machine. And when you have done that, you've just possibly reduced, yes, the amount of fiber. You might have a little bit of loss of something in that process, but generally you've not added anything to it. So that would be really a very minimal process that you've done to that one item. With some things, obviously, if we were to take other nut butters that you can buy, so peanut butter, you will also get some that perhaps have some extra salt or sugar, or maybe even things like palm oil added into that mix, which is more processed. We perhaps might not call it highly processed at that state, but it is more than just one process that it's been through. So I want you to think about that minimally processed category as how many processes do I think this food has been through? So another example we can take is bread, okay, or even pasta. Because obviously with your wholemeal bread, it's been through a process of the grains have been ground down, but they have kept all of the husks of that grain, which has the added fiber, added vitamins and minerals, some of the antioxidants still left in that grain. They've broken it down for you, so you have less digesting to do than if you were just to consume the whole grain as it was originally in its whole food form. But then we haven't, with the whole grain, taken too much away. We've left quite a bit of the fiber. Again, lots of the good bits that I just mentioned are still left in that whole grain bread. However, if we decided to go another step further and do an extra process and take away the husks of that whole grain, and we are just left with what we know as like the white flour, which is then used to make white bread, for example, we've then added an extra process, we've taken something good away, and in the majority of cases, particularly with white breads, you know, other things might be then added in. So we might have some extra salt, some sugar, maybe some other preservatives and additives are added in as an additional stage. So again, you can see how foods can go through different processes, and the more processes they tend to go through, the more you tend to lose the nutritional value of that food. Now, what you will find, and this will come back to maybe later on when we talk even more about marketing and what's on packaging and what you read in terms of the benefits of certain foods, you will see things like, let's say, cereals are a really good example. Okay, so again, cereals have started off as a whole grain, they get kind of broken down, and they might get flattened out, but then you will see on the packaging of things like cereals, things like added B vitamins, added iron, you know, increased or added in extra things. Now, that's all well and good. Obviously, originally it would have had all of the B vitamins and the iron, for example, in those whole grains before they were processed. But those have obviously been taken away in that particular process of making that cereal. So let's say something along the lines of wheat flakes is a good example. So what you're left with is very little nutrition. Okay, so what they do is they synthetically add back in those vitamins and minerals. Now, the big difference between having something in its original form, like the whole grain that it started off as, compared to something that's been entirely processed and then they've added vitamins and minerals back in, is although you would think, well, actually they've just replaced what they took out, when you add vitamins and minerals synthetically like that back into foods, they don't quite behave in the same way as they do in the original whole food. So in the original whole food, in that original grain, those B vitamins and iron are packaged really nicely with all of the fibre in that food, with other vitamins and minerals and antioxidants that it comes packaged naturally with. And we absorb that really well. Our body likes that. It's all part of the same package. But when we add things in separately, synthetically, obviously it's not packaged in the same way. It's not packaged with all of those other vitamins and minerals and the fibre in exactly the same way that it was in the whole food form. And so you don't always find that you absorb as much and you get the true benefit of those things. So that's another kind of side of the coin, if you like, when you're thinking about how processed your foods are. Even though it might say on the packaging it's high in this or it's got this added back into it, doesn't mean it's necessarily the best version of that food that you could have consumed. So it's obviously, I'm just giving one example there of cereal, but there's lots of other foods. So I would also encourage you to think about, when you're thinking about choice of foods for not only health and healthy eating, but also for performance, energy levels, things like that, that actually you're thinking, is there a whole food version of this processed option that I've got in my hands, or I'm about to order online, whatever it might be, because actually that's probably going to be a lot more nutritious for me. It's going to be a lot less processed, a lot more filling, and it's going to be really much better for my energy levels generally. And we'll talk about energy levels a bit more later on, but you know, the more processed a food is, it's going to be kind of what we call fast energy. It's going to be quickly digested. Your gastric emptying from your stomach is going to be a lot quicker, and that energy is going to go into your system a lot quicker. If you're looking for really good energy levels throughout your day, feeling less lethargic from the types of foods you're getting, so you have less glucose spikes, for example, from any sorts of carbohydrates that you might consume, healthy or not, you want to try and slow that gastric emptying as much as possible. So by eating more whole foods that have to be chewed, they take longer to be digested, they stay in your stomach for longer because your body has more of a job to do digesting them and processing themselves, the better. The more processed items you have, and obviously the more, as I say, thinking about that whole ladder of processing that food can go, the more processed an item is, the more processes in general that it has been through, the more likely it is it's not actually going to take particularly long to digest, and it's going to be emptying into your small intestines much quicker than whole food would, and you're going to have much kind of quicker, yes, energy levels if you need it as an athlete, great, but if you're just a general exerciser or someone who's just trying to have good energy levels throughout the day, you want more of what we might describe as a drip effect. You want it to be slowly feeding into your system so that you've got good energy levels consistently throughout your day. So that's another thing to think about. So food quality matters. Macro split. So those of you who aren't accustomed to describing certain types of food as macros, macros stands for macronutrients. So that is your carbohydrates, proteins and fats. We might also include alcohol in that as well, as it does have energy attached to it. And that does matter again, depending on the type of exercise that you're doing, how often you're doing it, and we will kind of cover that a little bit more later on. Timing of food also matters for people who are exercising. So again, it doesn't necessarily always matter in terms, lots of people think that you might have to have kind of protein straight after you've done exercise is one thing that's out there a lot of the time. Not necessarily the case, as long as you are generally having a meal that contains some protein within a couple of hours after exercising, which most people do. If you exercise first thing in the morning before you have breakfast, you might then have breakfast after that, which would cover that. Or if you exercise after you've had breakfast, normally you can have a lunch kind of before that, or you can include maybe a healthier mid-morning snack which includes some form of protein, which you then top up at lunchtime. So most people can kind of be within that period of time to make sure that you are getting protein on board for recovery purposes. The other thing to think about is obviously carbohydrates, and again, when you consume those. So carbohydrates generally are split into kind of two main categories. Lots of people might describe them as slow release carbohydrates and fast release carbohydrates. If you need energy, if you haven't had time to kind of eat slow release carbohydrates a couple of hours before you go and exercise, to make sure your blood glucose but also your glycogen in your muscles is topped up enough to give you enough energy for your exercising, then you might need to have something that's slightly more processed as a carbohydrate if it's less than 2 hours before, so that you can get that into your system a little bit quicker. The reason we say about 2 hours is that's generally how long it might take. Let's say you had a whole food breakfast, if you like, that's how long it might take your body to digest that fully, so that you've got enough energy in your system for your workout. However, as I said, the majority of the time you might even have a little bit of both. So you might have something that's more of a quick oats option in the morning with some whole fruit, so you've got a mixture, and that's going to get into your system a little bit quicker because oats are still relatively processed, even if they don't have sugar and extra things added into them. So that's going to be relatively quick into your system. Or it's also thinking about post-recovery. You still need to replace the energy that you've lost, as well as having some protein in your next meal. So again, depending on whether you're going to be exercising again after that later on in the day at all, or whether you've got maybe a sedentary job. So it might be that you exercise in the morning and then you think about going off to work afterwards, and actually you do need to refuel, but it doesn't need to be anything processed or fast carbohydrates to get into your system quickly, because actually you're going to go and sit down, you're not going to be using your muscles very much. So actually having something whole food that takes a couple of hours to actually then get into your system really makes no difference, as long as you're refueling before you perhaps need to do something more energetic again. So that's how we think perhaps about a little bit about how the timing of food matters, but there is a lot more around that topic that is important, that we won't necessarily have time to cover today, but maybe that's something, if you've got a question on, you can always get back to me if you've got specifics on that one. Obviously, we've talked about fast or slow release energy. Drinks also matter as well as food. So don't forget, drinks need to be included in terms of what you're including as additional energy that you're giving yourself, whether that is just, water. Obviously, you do need to think about topping up that throughout the day in general, but particularly after exercise. If you are actually thinking about exercising, you want to think about not consuming large amounts of liquid all in one go. It would be just make sure you take small sips throughout your session. but don't kind of go overboard with the food and the drink kind of during a session, even if it's something like you know, you've got some sort of pre-workout or a protein shake or a, you know, something that's caffeinated. You know, just take small amounts at a time throughout your workout, and then top up throughout your day. Think about the calorie load as well, the energy load that is with some drinks. You know, it all does add up. So think about that and what kind of energy it's going to give you. Obviously, things that aren't just, you know, your black tea, coffee, that kind of thing, has an energy, you know, load to it. Particularly, you know, we live in a bit of a cafe culture, don't we? You know, lattes, cappuccinos, something with a syrup in, you know, they're all lovely. And I you know, I have them myself. But you do have to remember how much energy, you know, is attached to each of those as well, and they can soon add up. So do think about those. And obviously, all of those kinds of drinks with those additional things in them are highly processed. So, you know, again, anything that's additional sugar in those, even things that kind of contain milk, the natural sugars, that's going to go into your system pretty quickly. It's not a kind of a slow release carbohydrate at all. So think about how that could also affect your energy levels if you consume those as well. We'll also mention a little bit about the role of supplements and ergogenic aids in terms of performance, those of you who are thinking about kind of supplementing certain things. And again, this might be something that you have questions on at the end if you've got a specific supplement or something that you've heard of, or you're not sure whether you should take it or not, this kind of thing. It's really an important area because I think it is very prominent in marketing at the moment in terms of supermarkets on the telly. But again, when I mentioned about vitamins and minerals earlier, it's really important to understand the difference between getting vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, things like that from real food and what you can achieve through eating real healthy foods compared to actually taking it as a supplement, which actually could be totally redundant and not necessary at all, could be just kind of a waste of your money. So if you do have questions over supplements and things, feel free to note them down and I can answer some of those at the end. Okay, so I want to think, obviously, those of you, some of you might be have specific goals in terms of exercises, you know, in general, whether you're a gym goer, whether you're thinking about getting into it a bit more. So I do want to cover it, you know, specifically in terms of sports nutrition a bit more for more, you know, keen exercises. So we're just going to kind of cover quite a lot of the basics in terms of why it's really important for athletes and sports people in general. But as I say, if you wouldn't necessarily consider yourself an athlete or a sports person, still think about how this is pretty relevant to most regular exercises as well, because there'll be lots of tips in there as well, which will be perfectly relevant for everybody. Okay, so obviously, nutrition is a controllable factor that plays an important role in the performance of any sort of athlete, sports person, general exerciser, or amateur performer. But as mentioned already, we are constantly bombarded with conflicting information about what to eat, what to drink, you know, when to have it and how to do it. Marketing companies, they sell the magic of these supplements that we've talked about as the winning formula for success. And for anyone who just want to be a successful performer, it is sometimes difficult to keep up to date on the latest research. There's so much coming out, you know, all the time in this area to decide what makes sense and what works for people. So sports nutrition in general is a bit of a science. It requires a really good, solid understanding of the nutritional factors affecting, obviously, performance, recovery, and health in general, plus a bit of a knowledge of the nutritional value of food. And I cannot really stress this enough. Even as a general exerciser, the more you can understand about food, what impact it has when you eat it, the types of food you're eating, what's contained in them, the more you can really educate yourself on that side of things, the better you're going to be in terms of not only your health, but as I say, if you're using it as a form of support for your performance and to feel better or to get you motivated to do more exercise, things like that, really try and learn as much as you can about food. Also fluids. Obviously, it's important to understand more about the kind of fluids that you're putting in your body as well, and the necessary skills, obviously, to implement appropriate nutritional strategies into your daily training, and if you are doing any sort of competition or event as well. Excuse me. Okay, so a key priority for most athletes or even general exercisers is to establish obviously a well-chosen training diet. So if you're thinking about food and trying to relate it to exercise and putting a plan in place for both, you need to be able to think, something that's not going to be too tricky for you to put in place first of all, but also something that can be what we might describe as easily manipulated depending on what you're doing on what day, because obviously we don't necessarily do exactly the same type of exercise every single day of the week or even every week of the year. Sometimes we change obviously what we're doing throughout the year, so we might do different types of exercise in the summer compared to in the winter because of the weather. Some time we might use the gym, sometimes we might just be outside exercising, sometimes we might doing it at home, and we'll have all different levels of exercise. Training load will be different. You might have different body composition goals again at different times depending on what your needs are, and again, if you've got any sort of event or competition, you would need to perhaps change a little bit the types of things that you're eating in preparation for those as well. So let's think about why a good diet in terms of healthy eating is actually an important foundation for exercise. Because, I mean, a good base diet provides obviously adequate nutrients that we've talked about, vitamins, minerals, your macros, antioxidants, and as already mentioned, the kind of energy that you're going to need for the type of exercise that you choose. And this is going to be important, for adaptations for training, supporting optimal recovery as well. So it doesn't matter whether it's just recovering from getting used to going back into exercise if you've not been doing much in recent times, and also to avoid what we might call excessive food stress. Okay, so excessive food stress is where we are overeating certain types of foods which are causing inflammation in our body. And often again, this still comes back to what I was talking about at the beginning, which is thinking about the difference between whole foods, minimally processed foods, and ultra processed foods. So tends to be the more of those ultra processed foods that we put into our body, we tend to increase the amount of inflammation that our body is experiencing. Our bodies are really well built for whole foods, for digesting them. That's why we've got the process of teeth grinding down our food, stomach with stomach acid trying to break it down, and all of those digestive processes that we have going on in the human body. Obviously, the more that we take away from that process, what we tend to find, particularly, as I say, when these foods go quickly into our system, we actually increase the amount of inflammation in our body. Our body has to cope with a lot of food being processed extremely quickly, and actually that can be just a source of inflammation in itself. So heavy training loads. If you are someone who is really into exercise, so you are a regular gym goer, or you do lots of competitions, or you're interested in doing lots of events, maybe you're a runner or a triathlete or something along those lines, maybe heavy training does obviously increase, or even if you're a beginner right now, and then you increase how much exercise that you're doing over time, and so for you it becomes more of a heavy training load, whatever that might be. This obviously does increase your need for nutrients, particularly carbohydrates, proteins, and micronutrients, not fat. Obviously, the body actually has very minimal needs for fat. Body fat and dietary fat is important for lots of reasons. It's important for hormone production, for example. It's important for nerve function and our brain, but actually it is a lot less than what most people think. And in the majority of cases, what you need to focus on is the amount of protein and whole food, good carbohydrates that you'll put into your diet. Obviously, the micronutrients that come along with those foods when you're including whole foods will be the vitamins, minerals, antioxidants. They're part of the package. So as long as you're mainly thinking about whole foods in your diet, then you don't need to worry so much about your vitamins and minerals. It's only when foods that you're consuming that are more in that minimally processed or ultra processed category that obviously might have already been stripped of those micronutrients, which is where you'd need to think about adding them back in. I want you to have a little think about these increased requirements for those, for example, the protein and the carbohydrates, normally you will meet your needs if A, you are providing yourself with adequate total energy, okay, for your actual body's needs. If you don't know how to calculate how many calories you actually need, you can go online. It's very easy. There's lots of kind of calculators, if you like, online to tell you how many calories you should be consuming. So you would put in things like your age, whether you're male or female, your age, your height, your current weight. It will give you a basal metabolic rate, so BMR, first of all, which is how many calories you burn at rest. So if you were to sit on the sofa all day, how many calories you would need just for your body to keep existing, if you like, heart beating, organs working, all of those things without even really using your muscles, okay? Then you can use those same calculators will then add on, if you need to, what your activity level is. So you could choose a multiplier which would either be something like sedentary, if you really don't do too much exercise, lightly active, moderately active, or heavy training load, or obviously if you are a professional athlete, then it will kind of calculate that in for you, and you would look at the different categories and find out what your actual calorie needs are. That would still give you a base of what you would need just to stay the same weight. Now, if you are someone who actually wants to lose weight and you're thinking about kind of trying to lose a little bit of weight through nutrition and exercise, once you've calculated that, then what you would need to do is obviously remove a small amount of calories, maybe something like 200 calories a day maximum. You don't want to lose weight too quickly. That's one of my biggest recommendations. Don't go too hard too fast. And just then have a look at what that calorie intake should be for your needs, okay? You then would need to think about balancing out your carbohydrate intake with your daily exercise load. So generally, our body wants carbohydrates for fuel. Now, obviously, lots of people have a very big question mark over the word carbohydrates sometimes. But when we are talking about carbohydrates for healthy eating and for fueling yourself for exercise and really good energy levels, you want to be going back to that whole food category and making sure that you are consuming plenty of carbohydrates that are within that category. Whole foods, vegetables, whole grains that haven't been changed. Potatoes are fine. Please don't vilify potatoes. They are a wonderful whole food with lots of vitamins and minerals, okay? Having those in their whole food form are what our body needs. They need that type of energy because our body's first choice of fuel is carbohydrate, okay? It processes it best, it breaks it down quickly enough to replace within, as I say, that kind of 2-hour window when you're eating the whole food version of a carbohydrate, which is absolutely ideal. What our body doesn't really actually like doing is breaking down proteins and fats for energy. Now, it will obviously do that, but it's a much longer process. And as I said, if you are someone who's trying to lose weight, what you will find is just by reducing your calorie load ever so slightly on a daily or a weekly basis, your body slowly will start to obviously break down the fat as fuel when it is slightly needing a little bit more. And you will know whether you've got your calculation right as to whether obviously you are losing weight. If you aren't, it might be that actually you've calculated it as slightly higher for your needs, but don't cut out carbohydrates as a rule, as a whole kind of category of foods, because your body does kind of prefer to have that, and you will still break down fat. Now, what you don't want to do is for you not to have enough carbohydrates in your system for your body then to take its second choice, which would be breaking down proteins, because we actually need those proteins for recovery and repair. So we want to maximize keeping as many proteins to do that job as possible. So therefore, we need to make sure we've got enough carbohydrates so that our body doesn't turn to protein and break it down for fuel instead. So that's a really important point to make about carbohydrates in particular. And then obviously, as part of that diet, you want to include a wide variety of just generally nutrient rich foods. Obviously, yes, protein containing foods, and having diversity. Diversity of food is absolutely key. So don't just always stick to the same kind of protein option. So you'll see lots of kind of weightlifters, people within sport, sticking to things like, you know, your classic combination of chicken, broccoli and rice. Okay, all great foods for replenishing carbohydrates, proteins and small amounts of fats, but do not include the variety that your body craves in terms of the different types of nutrients. Please make sure that you get a variety of different fruits and vegetables, so different colors, different textures every week. Don't stick to the same thing. Same with protein options. Obviously, you've not just got your kind of your meats and fish and eggs. There are a whole host of other really good quality proteins out there. You've got soya-based products, you have got beans and lentils. Obviously whole grains do have protein in them as well. There are some lovely kind of plant-based stuff out there, but again, I would still also recommend sticking away from highly processed items. We'll talk a bit more about labeling of certain types of foods which might be considered healthy or not, just because they've got a label like organic or plant-based, for example. So how does then exercise change your actual energy requirements? Well, obviously I've talked on it a little bit, but maintaining kind of energy balance is definitely a key goal for any athlete or sports person. Energy balance as such occurs when total energy intake from the food matches your energy expenditure from your daily activity. Obviously, energy is provided in the form of carbohydrate, protein, and fat, and also alcohol. I mentioned this earlier. It does have, you know, calories attached to it, which is 7 calories per gram of alcohol. So, you know, do take that into consideration as well. And obviously the energy requirements of an individual are also influenced by other factors and not just these particular things on the screen, such as your own body size and where you're starting off from, your body composition goals and actually what you want to achieve. So it's thinking about how you make adjustments for what your individual goals are. And of course, the energy cost of training. So in terms of what actually you put into place in terms of exercise goals and what you actually do will impact, obviously, the type of energy that you need and how much of it you need to add in. What I will really stress for those of you who are thinking about using exercise as your main form of trying to burn more calories or for weight loss, don't. It is a very, very small portion of what you need to consider in terms of weight loss. Nutrition is going to be your biggest factor when it comes to weight loss. Yes, you're going to burn more calories doing exercise, but you will be extremely surprised as to the amount of calories you do end up actually burning, even doing a really intense, I do apologize, a really intense set of exercises. Even if it was for a whole hour, you're going to burn a lot less than you think. I'm sorry, I'm just going to have a drink. Okay, so sorry about my tickly cough today. So what we're going to talk about next is going on to how you achieve more of a healthy, balanced diet. Now, many athletes are obviously faced with this challenge as well as just general exercises, and they, you know, they're looking to achieve a very high energy intake to support extremely high training loads, and or the cost of growth in terms of muscle growth, if that's something that you're looking to do, or maintaining a larger but definitely leaner body mass, which is what a lot of people would like to do. They want to build some muscle, but they want to stay lean at the same time. So Other athletes, depending on what your interests are. So for me, I'm a strength trainer, and so I'm very much within that category. I want to build muscle mass, but I want to stay lean as much as possible. Whereas other people are perhaps into higher cardio exercises, such as running, fast walking, cycling. Maybe you're a triathlete, as I mentioned earlier, something along those lines. And your energy levels and what you need are going to be slightly different to that person who is doing strength training. Maybe you're a mixture of the two, so you need to consider both. So you do need to consider your energy intake depending on what type of athlete you are. Some of you might need to maintain a lower body mass and lower body fat levels, and at times it can seem that following all sorts of sports nutrition guidelines or general nutrition guidelines that are out there, particularly on the telly in advertising and marketing, can actually work against some of the goals that you are trying to achieve when it comes to energy balance as well, particularly for athletes with lower energy needs, such as females, which is, I think, the majority of people who are on this session today. So women in general, you probably know, do actually need less in the majority of cases. Obviously, again, there are individual differences depending on body composition, that type of thing, and the type of training that you do. But as women, we do need less than men, and we do need to make sure that we consider that. It may not also, you've got to think about the practicalities of eating different types of food. It may not always be practical to have, for example, a large pre-exercise snack or even post-exercise snack, depending on what your kind of lifestyle is like, what your routine is like, what time you have. You might not have the opportunity to, if you're doing long distance things, for example, so some people who do long distance running, you might not also have time so much to consider consuming something during your run, which is what a lot of people do, or it might not be suitable for you as a runner. You might want to think about following recovery guidelines and still achieve an energy intake that's compatible to your body composition goals. Smart planning is what is actually needed for specifics of people who are regular exercisers, who have got an event or are an athlete. So this is where working with someone specific who works within nutrition like myself is important to get a plan in place, because even actually with regular exercisers, trying to organise what you eat when, what's right for you as an individual, depending on your lifestyle, because every person is different to the next, is really, really important. So you must kind of do smart planning and organising what you're eating when to optimise the benefits provided by nutrition for sport, obviously, and also making sure that's within the framework of each each person's unique energy needs and allowance. So although we can kind of give general advice for healthy eating, as I said, obviously everybody has different energy needs. It is really important to think about your unique kind of requirements, because it's not just what you're eating, it's what opportunities you've got to eat, when you're going to be able to eat that, how that's going to fit in with the exercise that you're doing. And the problem that you find, particularly for those people who are here because they're interested in finding out about not only the types of foods that are important to perhaps consider when you are combining that with exercise, but also thinking about your other lifestyle factors. So we all have different jobs. We all have different things that, we need to try and fit into our lives. We're busy at different times. So, one meal plan for someone with certain timings and food isn't necessarily correct for the next person, because we all have such different lifestyles. Also, things like sleep and stress need to be considered in terms of your choices of food. That can also play an important part. So actually, although I don't say to people who aren't kind of, as I say, seasoned athletes and need a very, very detailed meal plan, doing some very basic meal planning around when you're exercising, making sure you're able to fuel with something healthy before or afterwards, and you've actually decided on what maybe those foods are going to be, can be really, really important for people staying on track when it comes to whether it's weight loss, improving energy levels, etc. Now, I'm kind of touching a little bit on the things that I'm going to be covering in my next two sessions, because as I said, one of them is going to be all about energy levels and you know, that's going to be specific to healthy eating, and talking about the other lifestyle considerations that I've just mentioned, and how you can try and improve your energy levels, and that lacking kind of, you don't want to feel too lethargic in the afternoons after lunches, or even in your evenings and things like that. We'll be covering that in that session, and also the meal planning and the organisation side of things we're going to be covering in my other session. So if you are really concerned that actually one of the things that doesn't, you know, help you a lot of the time is when you struggle to be organized, and, you know, it's actually the convenience of not having healthy foods available, or not knowing how to organize it all, that's definitely going to be a session for you, because we will cover that in great detail, in terms of giving you lots of ideas about how you might do that practical wise, that hopefully will support a lot of people when it comes to staying on track with not only healthy eating but weight loss, if that's one of your goals. So in general, what does it mean by healthy eating? Well, obviously, you know, it involves eating food that promotes the optimal health of all your kind of bodily systems, and prevents the development of disease. Obviously, one of the things I told you that I do a lot of is working with people who have lots of common chronic diseases, which are kind of overtaking our NHS at the moment, and just generally trying to stick to some of these healthy diet rules, looking at the whole foods, minimally processed and ultra processed categories, and trying to make as many of your meals as possible from that whole food category is going to really help with that. And reduce your risk, or reduce how much you might perhaps be suffering with one of these particular chronic diseases, which can in lots of cases be maybe not fully reversed, but certainly can be improved a lot. A balanced diet, so a difference between healthy eating and a balanced diet is obviously a balanced diet involves regulating the quantities of those different types of foods that we've been talking about today. So obviously your carbohydrates, your proteins and your fats, and also regulating the portion sizes of the whole foods, the minimally processed foods, and those ultra processed foods. Regardless of the underlying perhaps quality of the foods that we mentioned earlier, and what how they're ingested, obviously just in general overconsumption of one food group at the expense of another also has the potential to upset kind of the delicate balance within our body. So again, that's another reason why lots of people might experience inflammation in different ways, is because actually the balance in the body of the types of macros that they're consuming isn't quite right. So it's a really important, when I mentioned the word portion sizes a moment ago, what I don't mean is that when people are looking to either eat healthy or lose weight, is that they actually have to reduce the amount of food that they put on their plate. This really upsets me when people tell me that they kind of go to small plates, or they reduce how much they're eating, but they're still really hungry. Generally, that is not something that people have to put them through, and actually isn't sustainable for most people. If you're anything like myself, I love eating, I love food, I love having a big meal every single meal time, and I love feeling full and satiated, not like I need to kind of keep snacking on things later on between meals. So to think about portion sizes, what I actually mean is think about the portion sizes of those different categories, again, that we looked at the beginning. So instead of making sure that you've just got a full plate with whatever can go onto that plate, you're actually thinking, can I make the majority of this plate whole foods? Then can I minimize the other things that are on my plate in terms of those minimally processed and certainly the ultra processed foods, which have lots of obviously things taken away from them and lots of additives put into them. So I will always focus on having a full plate, but that full plate being as many whole foods as I can pack onto that plate as possible. I'm really just trying to minimize those processed items. It's not going to be sustainable to say you're not going to have any processed items on your plate ever, because a lot of those processed items include things which A, are a bit more convenient to cook sometimes, okay, and B, which are treats, things that we want to be able to consume because they're enjoyable to eat. But it's thinking about, particularly across the general week, you know, your general working week, your Monday to Friday, as much as possible, and yes, at the weekends as well, but maybe with a few added extras, that you're trying to stay as consistent as possible with filling your plate with as many whole foods as possible. And then lastly, kind of that question of what does it mean by then nutrition? Well, nutrition obviously involves the delivery of essential materials which are required to promote optimal health and growth to cells and organisms around our body. So that is, again, thinking about that overarching theme of what I'm eating across my week and what am I providing that's healthy and nutritious for my body. Okay, so little bit more on what that means in terms of an optimal diet, particularly if you are someone who is interested in sports nutrition and getting the right kind of foods in for exercise, which is going to really complement what you're doing exercise wise. People obviously need to eat to survive, but health conscious individuals like yourselves, I'm sure, want to do more than just kind of survive. They want to choose a diet that optimizes their health. And an optimal diet should contain just the right amount of different nutrients to prevent deficiencies, first of all. Obviously, that's something we want to avoid as much as possible, and to maintain a certain nutrient level in your blood, or to at least minimize the risk of disease, as some of the things that we've already talked about. So for each nutrient, the optimal amount does vary, okay, depending on the parameter that you might be measuring, and obviously your needs as well. Some people will know that they are actually deficient in certain things. Maybe you've been tested, or you have something which stops you from absorbing certain vitamins and minerals, which might mean you do need to take a supplement. But as I said, in the majority of the cases, we can get all of the kind of required nutrients from whole foods. The optimum level is actually obviously different for each individual, depending on your genetic makeup and the quantity of other nutrients obviously in your diet. For example, men do have different needs to women, as we've already said, in terms of calorie needs as well. Growing children have totally different needs to adults. And then obviously things like athletes and sports people have different needs to sedentary individuals who don't do particularly much exercise. So again, it's about individualizing and making sure that you've got the right amount for you. Now, you can find out, again, it's very easy to kind of Google. You can go on to things like the World Health Organization, the NHS website will tell you kind of what the general needs are in terms of micronutrients, or if you think you might be deficient in something, you can find out more information about that there. So the NHS website is actually pretty good for giving lots of information on that side of things. But nutrition for sport, again, specifically for those people who are keen exercisers, fashion for sports nutrition is constantly changing. It's important to be aware of the advancements of technology. More detailed analysis obviously can be performed for people if you need to. You can get, there's a lot more testing out there, but I'd again work with a registered nutritionist or even dietitian if it's through the hospital to make sure that you're getting the right kind of sport and you're not just going online and kind of buying a random test for something to see whether you might be deficient in something. Make sure that you get a really good recommended option. The right diet and supplements can obviously mean the difference between winning and losing for some athletes. Athletes can manipulate their diet to improve endurance, to aid recovery, to alter your body composition, reduce fatigue, which is quite a big one for a lot of people, and obviously improve mental performance skills as well. Not something we've perhaps talked about so much today, but we will talk about a bit more in the energy balance session that I'm doing next week, because one of the things we need to think about sometimes is the specific types of foods that will be good for our brain, for our nervous system, to help us feel, particularly I work with a lot of women who go through menopause, obviously, and one of the things that they experience is what they might describe as brain fog. Okay, I'm sure lots of people experience this in general, but can be a particular symptom of menopause. And obviously there are specific foods that we might think about that are going to perhaps help with that, and that are going to make sure that you feel that you are trying to reduce that symptom as much as possible. You might not get rid of it, but reduce it as much as possible. And as we get older, we want to keep our brain ticking over. We want to feel like we're kind of still sharp and, you know, can do everything that we've always done. So again, that's something I'll probably cover a little bit more on the energy balance side of things in that session. Obviously, also coming back to performance, maximizing physical performance really does depend on giving the body the right kind of fuel for energy, as well as consuming the right balance of essential nutrients and fluid for maintaining general health, which, as I said, is important. But specifically, nutrition for sport involves understanding nutritional content of foods, as you can see there, the functions of the nutrients in foods, the role of fluids is very important. So I run a sports nutrition course, and we do a lot on electrolyte drinks. So again, if you're someone who's perhaps particularly those who are long distance, ultra kind of marathon runners, anything along those lines where you're doing extended exercise for extended periods of time, fluids are really, really important factor in that because it can really affect performance. Obviously sports supplementation as well, and obviously the energy demands of that particular sport. Now, sports nutrition also has a role to play in advice regarding all of these things, which, as I say, I'm going to be covering in my 2 other sessions. So things like, which is important for sports nutrition, but people in general when it comes to healthy eating, your meal planning, obviously your shopping, cooking, competition nutrition. So again, if you're doing some sort of event, you might want to be thinking about how you might change some of the things we've talked about in terms of your macro split when you are in an event or a pre-event. Supplements, obviously food prepping, which I am a massive fan of, and I'll be talking about in the batch cooking session that I'm going to be doing next week. Travel nutrition, when I go away on holiday, or if I'm traveling for an event, or I'm going on a cycling holiday, all of those kind of things can be important to consider that you might need to change ever so slightly if you are traveling. What should I take with me rather than buying something quick at the airport? You know, what other options are there? There are lots of other whole food options that you could possibly take, and again, consider what can I either take with me and prep ahead of time that is going to stop me from buying something kind of just convenient last minute that's very highly processed in the shop at the airport or when I get there. Also, you might want to think about sometimes how you have to adjust your food if you are a sports person when you have a lack of appetite. That actually can affect sports people quite a lot. Sometimes doing exercise reduces people's appetite, and so it's making sure that you're getting the right kind of enough fuel in, if you like, post-exercise. So sometimes if you do have a limited appetite to eat before or after exercise, you actually might want to think more about some of the types of foods that you're putting in your body, which are what we call those faster carbohydrates. They're slightly more processed. You want to try and stay as healthy as possible because of all those other nutritional components that are important to consume for your body, but actually you may need to think a little bit about having something which is slightly more processed sometimes if you're struggling, because then it will have probably a higher calorie load to it, which is important if you are struggling to eat. Obviously you want to think about recovery, but also we're going to talk, when we talk about batch cooking and things in the next section, we'll also look at eating out and takeaway food, because that is also something which lots of people kind of struggle with, and they're trying to stay either healthy or trying to kind of incorporate that into a healthy lifestyle when they still want to have treats. So I'll make sure I kind of cover that in that session. Okay, so performance, obviously I've talked about it already. Nutrition does affect performance, but so do all these other things. I want you to consider all of these other lifestyle factors in terms of your recovery, in particular rest. You know, that's really important when you're adding exercise into a new routine, particularly at this time of year. Lots of people have got lots of both nutrition and exercise goals all at the same time. Don't burn yourself out too quickly. Make sure you do take plenty of rest. Genetics, yep, it does have an impact. There's no denying that we are all different genetically, but a lot of the time it is a lot more minimal than what we think, and we tend to sometimes use genetics as an excuse as to, you know, why we can't lose weight or eat in a certain way or do a certain exercise. Again, consider talking to a registered professional, whether it's a personal trainer or whether it is someone who's a registered nutritionist, if you're not sure whether it is something that's kind of perhaps more genetic or whether it is something that you know, you can do something about, even if you feel it's something that's in your family. Obviously, equipment's important if you have got that. Training, sleep, mental attitude, skills, all of those things very kind of important to think about when it comes to performance. The last thing I just wanted to mention, because I know I've already gone over time, I said I'd try and leave time for Q&A at the end, which I'm happy to stay on for a little bit longer, which is fine for those of you who can hang around. Otherwise, feel free to pop it in the chat and I'll answer it anyway. You can rewatch this recording at any other time. Is just food quality. I've talked a lot about it in terms of whole foods, but there's also lots of things out there marketing wise in terms of organic, bio, prebiotics, probiotics, grass-fed, vegan, plant-based, again, take everything with a little bit of a pinch of salt, particularly when it comes to marketing these products and what's on the packaging. Strip it right back every time and think whole foods. If I'm worried about, whether it has this, that, and the other, whether it's good for me or not, use those ingredients list on the back of packaging to check what's in it. Is it mainly whole foods, even if it's a minimally processed item? Or are there lots of other things which I either don't recognise or look like they're processed items that have been added into that particular food? And try to make sure that you're just stripping it back and making it as simple for yourself as possible. Whole foods as best you can. Okay, so if you do want to get in contact with me after the session, you can kind of email me, info@proformanceuk.com. I'm on all the kind of social media, so you can find me on Twitter, or X as it's now called, Facebook and Instagram. I try and I will be putting lots of kind of top tips in terms of nutrition and exercise up on there in the weeks to come. Obviously, you can, if you want to speak to me one-to-one at any time, you can kind of book appointments or just get in contact through the website, which is proformanceuk.com. And as I said, we're based in Histon and Impington, but I also do virtual appointments. Now, I've got a couple of things in the chat. Let me just check if they are questions. No, just some lovely comments about perhaps coming back to the sessions next week, and hopefully got plenty out of that session. Is there anyone else who would like to come on and ask a question at all? Oh, I've got one here. Someone who's a vegetarian. Okay, so someone who's a vegetarian, what are the best protein alternatives to meat in terms of whole foods? Great question. Okay, so the highest protein options, which they're not 100% whole food, but they are minimally processed with nothing necessarily added to them, are things like tempeh is one of your highest protein options. You can buy it in most supermarkets now. You can buy them already kind of flavored with herbs and spices, or you can buy a plain block and marinate it yourself in some herbs and spices and cook it with your other food. The other thing is textured vegetable protein, or kind of dry, what we call soya mince. You can buy it online. You can buy it you can't buy it in too many supermarkets at the moment, but you can buy it in places like Holland and Barrett. There's a really great website called buywholefoodsonline.com. Very reasonable, not expensive. You can buy it in bulk, which is really good, which is what I do actually. And so those two are very high kind of protein options, which are as close to whole food as you can get. Obviously, any sort of legume, beans of any kind, chickpeas, etc., combined with whole grains are a great source of protein. Make sure that you get those into your diet regularly. But as I say, those two things in particular, the tempeh and the textured vegetable protein, or what you might call soya mince, are some of the highest options that you can have. Tofu is also pretty good, but it is lower in protein and slightly higher in fat than those other options, which are going to be kind of slightly leaner options. The other thing that you can buy, but it is slightly processed, what's it called? It's basically like you use a vital gluten kind of gluten wheat. It's kind of it's got a special name. I can't think of it off the top of my head. No, can't think of it. If you look up kind of vital wheat gluten, and you can make you can kind of use it to kind of make your own version of a bit like kind of chicken textured. Again, you put your own herbs and spices in it, just combining that type of flour with water. It's really high in protein, so it's a great option, but it is obviously more processed, if you like. I think you can buy some of it ready-made as well, but I would generally stick to kind of, as I say, tempeh and the TVP or the soya protein mince as an option, and then get plenty of beans and whole grains into your diet as well. What else have we got here? We've got a couple of other questions. About to do 3 gym classes a week, trying to vary it with spin, body tone, and Pilates. I know lots of people who have protein bars, shakes after exercise, but I'm not sure how healthy they are. Is there any particular things you recommend that are a good snack straight after exercise? So if you do things like, so gym classes, so you've got spin, high cardio, body tone, it's going to be, you know, a little bit of kind of strength work, strength and conditioning, similar with Pilates. You don't need a massive replacement of stuff after things like that. Spin, obviously, you want to replace with some carbohydrates. If you're not going to be doing anything majorly active later on in the day where you need energy within a couple of hours, you can just easily get away with having something, you know, it doesn't have to be a snack straight away. So as long as it's within a couple of hours, you'll be absolutely fine. If you are going to have something like a protein shake, try to go for something which is not a really, really high processed protein. So you can get protein powders, which are, again, things like the soya-based ones, because they don't have any additives in, but they're like, you know, like 90% protein. You'll get a good 20 grams in a scoop of something like that. You could mix it in with some kind of, I use frozen fruit quite a lot. So I get the frozen fruit, I defrost it in the microwave, heat it up, put the protein powder in, mix it in with the liquid, and have that as a kind of snack, or sometimes even as a breakfast. But make sure, because that protein shake will be absorbed extremely quickly after you consume it, because it's obviously highly processed, have something whole food before it. So I encourage my clients to have something like a couple of bits of whole fruit. So it might be an apple and a pear, or an apple and a banana, maybe, depending on your energy needs. Then have your protein shake after that, so that you slow down the gastric emptying of that into your system, so you're not getting that big energy spike, and it's not going to make you feel lethargic afterwards. If you think that's the only convenient way because you haven't got much time, then protein shakes aren't a bad idea. But I would just say, think about the quality of the protein powder that you're buying. Try and buy the one which has the least amount of additives, extra sugar, which is just extra energy that you don't probably need into your diet, and try and pre-fuel with what I call either a fruit or a veggie starter beforehand. Get some whole foods in there to kind of slow down that gastric emptying before you have it. With protein bars, again, if you are someone who's an athlete, you're then going to need quick fueling. Absolutely fine. The majority of people consume these things and then go to an office desk and sit down and don't use their muscles. So in the majority of cases, all they're doing is adding extra calories to their diet, which is not going to help them from a weight loss perspective, if that's what you're kind of looking to achieve. In terms of protein, it could be, again, you just have like another a whole food snack, like any of the ones I've mentioned. So, you know, it could be a little snack that's got, could have a few nuts possibly, but again, think about the kind of high fat content of that as well. Or it could be some veg that you dip in a little bit of nut butter to get a bit of protein and a bit of veg in there at the same time. So always try and combine it with something that's high fiber as well, if you're not going to, as I say, need to process that energy super quick to go and do some more exercise of any kind. So it swings and roundabouts. You know, protein shakes can be good if you choose good quality, but think about how you're consuming them, when you're consuming them. Do you need those extra calories, or could you just have some pieces of fruit and then have your, you're going to be having your lunch a bit later on, so therefore you're going to have protein in that, so you don't need to worry about kind of having protein straight away, as long as you're having it within a couple of hours of actually doing that workout. When you are doing cardio based things, think more about fueling with whole food carbohydrates. When you are strength training, so you're actually lifting weights and decent weights as well, you know, for what you're used to, then you perhaps might want to prioritize protein more over the carbohydrates. So that perhaps might be the difference between the type of training that you're doing as well. Okay, let's have a look. Oh yeah, frozen fruit. Yeah, frozen fruit is an absolute winner. I'll talk a lot more about things like that when I do the meal planning, budgeting, and also energy levels as well. I'm a big fan of using frozen fruit and veg for stuff, and it will be really good to talk more about some of those topics if you're able to make it to next week's session. Okay, I think that's it in terms of the questions, but do, as I say, feel free to email me, info@proformanceuk.com, and obviously if you want to find out any more about the services that I offer in terms of